Welcome to the Prairie FILES, a true crime podcast. Please note, trigger warning. This podcast contains graphic depictions of real-life violence. It may be alarming to some listeners. Listener discretion is advised. Hello, and welcome to Chapter 2 of 1406. In Chapter 1, we learned of the events leading up to the gruesome death of David Wong. In this chapter, we focus on the 5 main participants in the story. We summarize each of the accused charges and sentences, and later on, we dive into their crimes before and after the events of David Wong's dismemberment. There is no new information on these cases, and all information in this story is composed of public records, including court records, the Edmonton Journal, the Edmonton Sun, CBC, Global, and the last link on the left. Nothing in this story has any legal bearing. It was April 16th, 2007, and we go to 1A Sir Winston Churchill Square, the law courts in Edmonton, Alberta. This case was tried in the Court of Queen's Bench. It's the superior trial court for the province of Alberta, hearing trials in civil and criminal matters, as well as appeals and decisions from the provincial court. The very experienced, Honorable Justice Sterling Sanderman was residing over the case. 3 of the 4 men charged in the connection with David Wong's death were in court to hear formal charges against them. Kyle Grampentine, Michael Gray, and Nicholas Harris, shackled and wearing blue prison jumpsuits, were each charged with 1 count of accessory to murder and 1 count of offering an indignity to a body. Jason Castoros did not appear in court that day, and speculation arose. The first thing that came to my mind was maybe Jason Castoros was going to make a deal. In most cases, all accused will show up to court together, and when one doesn't, there's speculation. Possibly they've made a deal that others are not even aware of yet. But not in all cases, and we later learned this was not the case. Being a snitch is a very dangerous game in the criminal underworld. Luckily for Jason, there was no deal and he did not sell out his accomplices. Now you have to remember these are most likely gang members and have done time already. They know how the system works and they live and die by a code. They are not like most of us civilians who will do the right thing. In many cases, if nobody talks, it's a brick wall for investigators. They can only follow evidence. Who did the murder, how, and why. They needed to find out which of the 4 took the life of Wong. Or maybe it was someone else. Who knows? Nobody talked, or nobody tried to get a deal. And they had what's known as a scintilla of evidence. They couldn't pursue a murder conviction. The scintilla of evidence doctrine refers to a common law principle stating that a motion for direct verdict or summary judgment cannot be granted if there exists even the minutest relevant evidence. So in other words, they had no evidence. They couldn't go to trial. The likelihood of conviction would be very low. After formally being charged, the 3 showed no emotion and occasionally looked over into the gallery searching for loved ones. The judge then set May 7th, 2007 as their next appearance. Jason Castoros was formally charged at another time. We don't have any information on the May 7th court appearance, but on October 23rd, 2008, the four men, Grampentine, Gray, Harris, and Castoros, all agreed to plead guilty to the lesser charge of being an accessory to murder after the fact and interfering with a dead body, dodging the charges of manslaughter or murder. According to multiple media reports, Crown Prosecutor Doyle said in her sentence argument, the offense was a protracted and determined effort and a callous disregard for basic human values. Removing the limbs of a man, placing them in garbage bags, and cutting through his limbs with a hacksaw. This is the sort of conduct that sends a chill through the community, as it should. Because they pleaded guilty, it went directly to sentencing. Sentencing didn't come easy for the Court of Queen's Bench Justice Sterling Sanderman, and I am sure he wishes he could do more, but he is only limited to what the law allows. Eventually, the sentences were announced. Jason Castoros and Michael Gray, who were both 23 when they were charged, were each sentenced to 4.5 years in prison. Castoros was on parole at the time, so the Crown wanted a heavier sentence of 68 years, but they were unsuccessful. Nicholas Harris was sentenced to 4 years and 3 months in jail for Wong's dismemberment. He was the oldest of the four, 25 years old, when he was charged. Justice Sanderman labeled Harris as a danger to the community, someone who had a lengthy criminal record, including drug trafficking and aggravated assault charges, and was on parole at the time of Wong's dismemberment. The judge added 3 months for breach of conditions. The Crown had asked for 68 years, but again, they were unsuccessful. It really makes me wonder how a judge thinks 4 years is enough for someone who he just labeled as a danger to society. And you won't believe what happens later on in Harris's life. Or can you? We will get into that a little bit later. Kyle Grampentine, the fourth man convicted, who was 23 at the time of the incident. He was sentenced to 2 years and 8 months in jail. The Crown had asked for a term of 5 to 7 years, but they were also unsuccessful. Grampentine, the only one of the four not to have a criminal record, and the only one not held in custody during the proceedings. The parents of Michael Grampentine broke down crying when they heard the sentence handed down, while onlookers were shocked at what just transpired, as if they were expecting more from the judge. Was this justice? You be the judge. Let me know. After the sentencing, Justice Sanderman went on to say a lot of powerful words that I'd like to share. He reiterated that the act was a joint effort and everyone was in it together. In one of his final, powerful statements, he was quoted, "One of the hallmarks of a civilized society is how we treat and respect the dead." These young men exhibited a complete disregard for the sanctity of a human body. They dealt with the body of Mr. Wong as if it was a carcass of a dead animal. It appears as though the four of you were in the process of discarding parts of this man's body, as if it was offal, as in leftover parts from a slaughterhouse. Sanderman went on to lecture the convicted for treating Wong's body with utter contempt and disregard, saying they turned the downtown apartment into an abattoir, which resembled their own private chamber of horrors. They were in it for the penny, in it for the pound, Sanderman said, adding he was disgusted with the case. Covering up the crime, that you should be punished, he said. The gruesome acts after push it up. The destruction of evidence. The purpose was to dispose of evidence of the murder, Sanderman said, suggesting their actions prevented the police from charging someone with Wong's murder. Obviously, he's alluding to how they cheated the autopsy by probably making it impossible to see how he died. Apparently, there was 160 cut marks. He seemed most angered with the intent of the four men. And those were the final words from the justice. He really knows how to send them on their way to federal prison. Now, a little side note here. Shortly after the sentencing, a lawsuit had been filed by the public trustee of Alberta representing the estate of David Wong on behalf of his son and parents. The statement of claim, entered on October 15, 2008, asked for $650,000 and alleged one, more, or all of the four men recently charged wrongfully killed Wong on February 20th, 2007. According to the statement of claim, Wong was healthy, employed, and contributing financially and otherwise to support the upbringing of his son prior to his death. Wong's son was 2 years old at the time. As a result, his son is now deprived of the maintenance, support, care, training, education, and assistance provided by Wong, and a normal expectation that it would have continued in the future. $500,000 in damages was being sought for the loss of financial dependency, loss of household services, and loss of contribution to post-secondary education. It sought a further $45,000 in bereavement damages for the boy, $75,000 in bereavement damages for Wong's parents. Additionally, there is $20,000 for funeral expenses and $10,000 for grief counseling. Statements of claim contained allegations not yet proven in court, but we have no update at this time. I highly doubt they'll see any of this money, but they will get some victim compensation from the government. At least I would imagine so. As sad as it is, to date, the police have never charged anyone in Wong's murder, and the motive to the grisly murder remains a mystery. Rest in peace, David Wong. Now we take a closer look at the suspects and the victim. I have information on all 5 people in this case, some of their background story, and what happened after the David Wong case. Some was dreadful, and some gives hope that people can change, but in some cases, it's too late. I'll start with David Wong. I want to start with our victim. He may have been involved in some shady stuff and may well have been a gangster, but first and foremost, he was a human being who didn't deserve this regardless of what he may or may not have done. He was a son and he was a father. We don't know much about his personal life, but he had a pretty checkered past. David Wong and the 4 men charged in connection with his dismemberment were all known to law enforcement. In April 2007, Wong was scheduled to appear in court in Wetaskiwin on charges of drug possession and possession of a weapon dangerous to the public, along with his associates. But unfortunately, David Wong was never able to make that court appearance. Previously, in August 2002, when he was 18 years old, he had been charged with possession for the purpose of trafficking. Police had raided a West End apartment and seized 60 grams of cocaine, 10 grams of suspected methamphetamines, and $1,400 in cash. When officers made the bust, they were cooking up crack. The Edmonton Sun quoted a source who knew Wong and said he was a gentle giant who had survived many incidences of violence throughout his life, including a shooting and a machete attack at one point. He was involved in a few violent episodes where he was the target, but he always stayed quiet and never pursued charges. I guess you can say he refused to snitch. The source went on to say, "Everyone that I know is just kind of sad that he had to go this way." The source didn't want his name printed. The source said Wong brought his gruesome fate on himself by the way he lived his life. This is not something that happens to an everyday Joe Blow. Now, I don't know how much I fully agree with this. Many people become drug dealers, join gangs for many reasons, but not all are killers. Not all of them are terrible people that deserve to die. Many of these people carry traumas. They have no other choice. So, I think there's a lot of reasons. Not to say this is the case for David Wong, but it is for many. It's a human issue. Next, we're going to talk about the accused. Kyle Grampentine, at the time of David Wong's dismemberment, didn't have a criminal record, but went on to break the law. During the investigation, Grampentine was the only one of the four not held in custody throughout the court proceedings, and was frequently observed screaming profanities and making obscene gestures to aggressive media. Parents for Kyle Grampentine broke down crying when the judge sentenced the son to almost 3 years in prison. So I feel bad for the parents. They probably really loved their son. They seemed to be there for all the hearings supporting Kyle. I don't know them. It's easy to judge or speculate, but could have been really good parents. We don't know. It's a shame some kids just turn out the way they do. Now, I believe Kyle served his time and eventually went on to be paroled when his statutory release was final. He had some drug issues in jail. Nothing stopped him from being released because he was not assessed as being a danger to society or to reoffend. However, shortly after Grampentine got out of prison, he was found guilty of a single count of uttering threats to cause death and was sentenced to 6 months back in jail and 2 years of probation. He must have been fairly fresh out of prison from the David Wong dismemberment at this point. He was convicted of the latest charge after a short trial concluded. It was said that he had threatened a young man through 2 phone calls, including at least one he made from inside prison. Found in the St. Albert Today newspaper, the victim testified he knew Grampentine socially through mutual friends and said he recognized his voice when he received the calls last summer. He said other than secondhand rumors, he did not know why Grampentine was angry and threatening him. He testified he began receiving phone calls from a phone number he did not recognize. After initially ignoring them, he answered. Grampentine was on the other end. He said Grampentine said he was getting out of prison soon, and the victim would be done or dusted. He then received the second call, this time from a different phone number, but with a similar message. The witness said the implication was he would be killed and end up a red stain on the pavement. During his cross-examination and closing arguments, defense lawyer Angus Boyd pointed out several inconsistencies in the witness's statements as well as potential flaws in the police investigation. Crown prosecutor Bill Wister suggested the inaccuracies were minor and not relevant to the important information, whether their calls were made or not. Judge Bruce Garrick ultimately determined none of the inconsistencies or lingering questions rose to meet the standard of reasonable doubt, adding he believed the testimony of the victim. Next, we're going to talk about Michael Alexander Gray, a regular kid at one point from St. Albert, maybe one of the more dangerous people Edmonton has seen in many years. His background is probably more deplorable than the others. Gray was convicted of a senseless, alcohol-fueled stabbing death of Leighton Leslie Montpellier of Fowler, Alberta, after an altercation outside of Cowboys Country Saloon at 101 Avenue and 180th Street on the west end of Edmonton on November 11, 2001. It didn't take long for Gray's adult criminal history to start. Gray, who had just turned 18 hours before, was charged alongside Stephen Joseph Sharkley, also 18, for second-degree murder. Gray faced an additional charge, possessing a prohibited weapon, and Sharkley's charge was later reduced to manslaughter. Montpellier, a 22-year-old, fourth-year University of Alberta engineering student, died of a single stab wound to the chest. He was at the saloon with 20 members of his hockey team. What a shame. Ford heard Gray was celebrating his birthday when he got into a scrap with Montpellier inside the bar. The Journal wrote around 2 a.m. bouncers removed Gray and his friend Sharkley, along with Montpellier. The club manager said combatants were put outdoors at opposite ends of the building, but later testimony indicated they had gone through the same door. This is something cowboys would always say, but I think deep down, they wanted people to fight and it was a show for the bouncers. I've seen this with my own eyes on numerous occasions. I was also involved in something that I'll tell you about later. Outside, more words were exchanged and Montpellier turned to run. He slipped on the parking lot's gravel and fell, allowing Gray to catch up to him. As Montpellier rose, Gray unfolded an illegal split-handed butterfly knife and stabbed him. Montpellier made his way 150 meters to a gas bar for help. He collapsed on the floor inside. The attendant quickly locked the door while Gray and Sharkley kicked the glass, yelling, "We're going to kill you!" Unfortunately, Montpellier died a few hours later from a punctured heart. His family's hearts were broken. When I heard this for the first time, it gave me shivers and tingles through my spine when I think about what can happen to anyone and what happened to me back in 2004 at the Cowboys nightclub. It was the place to be. It was a lot of fun. It's where everyone went. They had 25-cent draft nights, and they played way less country than you would think. But one Saturday night in September, I was on top of the world. Nothing could knock me off my pedestal. At the end of the night, we left the bar, and I remember seeing my friend with 3 strangers I'd never seen before. He was in a headlock. They were all wearing long white t-shirts, and I thought this was some sort of a joke, I told myself. I then went up to them. Normally I'm a happy drunk. I said, "Hey guys, what's happening here? We don't have any beef." Then out of nowhere, I was struck with a sucker punch from behind. From off the side, it just rocked me, and I hit the floor. Apparently, they were also kicking me in the face when I was down on the ground. I blacked out after a few moments, and I woke up in the back room stumbling like a zombie, my face completely shredded, nose broken, eye socket caved in, and probably my ego left on the concrete. I won't get into too much details, but it's caused me a lot of problems mentally and physically over the years. I still have some physical symptoms as well as some scars mentally. According to St. Albert Today, Gray pleaded guilty to manslaughter in March 2003, claiming he didn't intend to kill, that his judgment was impaired by alcohol. He also pleaded guilty to weapons charges. Court of Queen Bench Justice Jack Watson imposed a sentence of 5 years in April 2003. Sharkley, Harris's buddy, pleaded guilty to uttering threats and received a conditional discharge. He was to serve 12 months probation and complete 75 hours of community service. A National Parole Board document described him as having shown impulsive, antisocial behavior while in custody. The report also noted he had a tendency to externalize blame and take little responsibility. Montpellier's brother, Lane Montpellier, 38, said he was not surprised Gray was in hot water again with the Wong case. This is a classic case of how the justice system fails, giving him 5 years. It might seem like a lot, but if people knew how much you actually serve, it's a joke. Montpellier's mother, Nellie Montpellier, said she was shocked to learn her son's killer had been charged in the David Wong case. While at the end of the day, the parole board does not have any say on whether someone is released. That's a 2/3 mark. They can only impose special conditions on the release, as they did in this case. The board said it's deeply concerned about Gray's behavior in prison. You have numerous institutional entries of being involved in the drug subculture, possible gang ties, assaults of other inmates, and disrespect towards staff. The board also noted some of Gray's visitors tested positive for drugs and that he was thought to be a major player in drugs inside the institution. The report notes Gray did express remorse over Montpellier's death, but in Wong's case, it was Gray that downplayed his involvement. Overall, the report concludes Gray does not take responsibility for his actions. We are not sure where he is today, but we hope he has changed his ways and become way less violent. Next, we're going to talk about Nicholas Richard Harris. Just before the Wong incident, Nicholas Harris was charged with drug offenses following a cocaine-related arrest in Grand Prairie in March 2006. Harris was then charged and did some time for the David Wong murder in 2007. After his release from prison, his whereabouts shortly after is unknown, but it's suspected he was in the drug trade. Then in 2013, according to the Edmonton Sun and court documents, he was wrapped up in the case of Najin Bahami, a young Edmonton mother nabbed in what police call the largest bust ever in Alberta for the party drug known as GHB, or date rape. Bahami and her co-accused Nicholas Harris were under surveillance when they were pulled over and arrested. Police seized $15,000 in cash, utility knives, and other objects related to crime. This gave the police the ability to get a search warrant for the condo. There they found the record amount of drugs, with a street value of $212,000. Police also seized a half a kilo of cocaine with a street value of $80,000. However, in this particular case, Harris was let off. All his charges were stayed. From what I read, it looks like his co-accused took the rap. However, 12 years later, in 2019, according to the Edmonton Journal, at the age of 37 years old, he was sentenced to life in prison with no chance of parole for 25 years for the grisly shooting of another Edmonton man, John William Rock, 28. Rock died after being shot outside the Canadian Brewhouse pub in Grand Prairie on October 1st, 2014, in a dispute over a drug debt. At the time, both Harris and Rock trafficked cocaine and knew each other for 18 years. After a 2.5-year-long police investigation, Harris was charged by the RCMP with first-degree murder and related firearms charges in April of 2017. During his trial, Harris took the stand and testified that he acted in self-defense. Court of Queen Bench Justice E.J. Simpson dismissed Harris's self-defense argument. Court heard that the two men met up inside the brewhouse the night of the killing. Harris thought they would try and settle their debt. He also believed 2 drug gang members were being held hostage by Rock and some of his associates. In the agreed statement of facts, evidence cited in written decisions showed the 2 men moved outside and Rock threw 2 punches that hit Harris. Harris then shot him once in the leg and once in the chest as Rock was coming at him. But when Harris walked out of that Canadian brewhouse with a loaded handgun in his pocket to deal with whatever came his way in his dispute with Rock, including using the handgun, he was not acting reasonably in the circumstances, Simpson wrote. Harris showed absolutely no emotion and chose not to say anything to the court after the sentence. 1 month after being sentenced to life in prison, Harris filed a notice of appeal to the Alberta Court of Appeal. The notice of appeal filed asks for the first-degree murder conviction to be overturned and for Harris to be acquitted. Harris's defense team argued that the judge erred in his interpretation and application of the legal principles for planning and deliberation of first-degree murder. Among other things, the notice of appeal also argued that the judge did not correctly interpret and apply legal principles related to self-defense, circumstantial evidence, and the assessment of credibility. At this time, there is no news on Harris's appeal other than he is still in jail serving a life sentence. It's quite disturbing to think that he could be out by the time he is 50 years old. In this next segment, we'll talk about Jason George Castoros, our final suspect. There is a level of personal interest with Jason, as I have some connections with his family in various ways. I never personally met Jason, but I've experienced both sides of the human element, the murderer and the loved family member. Jason was another one of those just regular kids. He came from an upper middle class family, growing up and going to church. His dad seemed like a good guy. He was a successful car salesman, and his mom was an instructor at a local college. In fact, she was one of my teachers at an Edmonton college in the early 2000s, before the incident happened. I didn't put two and two together at the time, but many years later, I also found out that I knew Jason's sister from various circles of friends. I won't get too personal out of the respect for everyone who's been hurt. I'd like to play a video of Jason himself talking about his journey to becoming a better person. He admits to struggling with his behavior as a kid, and that's where it all started.
My name is Jason George Castoros. I grew up going to church and, upper middle class family. There were some problems in the family and in the home, and I drew away from God because I blamed God for the problems in the family because I was young and I didn't understand, and at a young age I went into, getting in trouble, running away from home, maybe as a way to cry out to my family. It got deeper and deeper and went further and further, and as an adult, a young adult, I was fully entrenched in a criminal lifestyle, and at the age of 19, I made a mistake and I went to prison for 6 years. I went for about 4.5 years. My sentence was 6 years. And I was released on my statutory release, that's the 2/3 of your sentence. And within 4 months of that release, I was back in prison, and I was going up on more charges. And I finished that sentence and then was sentenced again. And I was now doing another sentence. And in total, I did about 10 years and 7 months in prison, with only 4 months out in between that. So I've been out now for about 1.5 years. And in truth, it has been a struggle. But all along this whole time that I was in prison, it's just my family just maintained just praying. And, we had our ups and downs, but they've always loved me. They've always been supportive to me. And, a lot of families would give up on somebody who is living like that because it's just hard for them to watch. And I'm thankful to God because I know that without God, I would be completely hopeless and completely lost. Before Jesus, I didn't believe a perfect life existed. I just felt broken, and I did not believe in a perfect life. I'm lucky I'm not dead. I'm lucky I'm not still in prison. Life with Christ and hope is a blessing. God sees value in me, and God loves me, and I'm so thankful for that, because when no one else can see it, God can. I feel the peace of God it's a day-to-day thing. I feel like even like with people around me, I just want to lift people up. And I want to be kind towards people. I just feel it. It's like becoming a part of my personality. The perfect Christmas for me is exactly how I believe my Christmas is going to be. And it's going to be surrounded by people that I love and who love me, and that I cherish and who I know cherish me. My family now, they're happy to see that I'm finally coming around. They love me. They know I have a good heart. They know God is working in my life, and they're exhilarated because they've been waiting so long for it to happen. And it seemed hopeless for a long time. And now they're empowered with the hope that God's given me. And I think it's giving them hope as well. And it's making them realize that yes, their prayers, God heard them, God answered them, and God loved them, and God is honoring them because they were faithful. I owe it all to God. So yeah, it was awesome.
Now, after Jason's release, court documents show in 2004 he was given a 12 months probation for an assault in 2015. Then he got 30 days in jail for breaching his peace bond. After his release, he found God again and was able to start the process of turning his life around with support of his family and his God. Unfortunately, 7 years after his conviction in the Wong case, he became the victim of a violent crime himself.
A man who served time for helping dismember a body in a downtown apartment has been shot to death in front of his parents' home. David Owasik reports tonight that police will not yet say if the man's past played a role in his murder.
Late last night, moments after gunfire rang out, police say a 32-year-old man died outside his parents' home, despite a neighbor's efforts to resuscitate him.
Police were able to locate a male that had sustained a gunshot wound, and we're currently investigating. Our homicide section is responding as well.
Police identified the man as Jason George Castoros. He and 3 friends all took part in chopping up a man's body in a downtown apartment back in 2007. Castoros did time for being an accessory to murder after the fact, for dismembering and stuffing parts of 23-year-old David Wong into plastic bags. Many of the neighbors we spoke with today say they were well aware of the young man's criminal history. Some said they were uneasy with it. We were also told that at least one family with young children moved away when they heard his prison release would see him living with his parents.
I'm a firm believer in this neighborhood. It's an awesome neighborhood. The people are good. We know all our neighbors. They're awesome neighbors, eh?
This neighbor is convinced the fatal shooting is a one-time anomaly in this neighborhood. Police aren't saying Castoros was targeted, but they aren't discounting the victim's past.
Obviously, given the individual's prior conviction with respect to that offense, I think there's some starting points for detectives. That's not to suggest or implicate anybody in particular, but certainly those avenues are, I'm sure, are being thoroughly investigated as well.
In Lewis Estates, David Owasik, CTV News.
So, in the end, unfortunately, before he was able to turn his life around, he was cut short. According to friends and family, just before his death, he was really making strides. But just like that, redemption was struck down and everything Jason had worked towards was gone. It was a bitter ending to his story, but one that a person can learn from with respect to redemption and second chances at life. The Edmonton Sun wrote, speaking at his funeral, church member Angie met Jason's mother about 5 years before. Jason's mother shared her deep anguish about her troubled son. Angie prayed for Jason and would hope one day he would walk through the doors of that church. Then one day, in September, she was elated to see that her prayers had been answered, and Jason came through the doors. Jason wanted so much to get his life in order. He was deeply remorseful for his mistakes, and all he wanted was to be accepted for who he was, not for what he did. Jason worked as a landscaper and had dreams of eventually starting his own landscaping business. He even had a name picked out already, Diamond in the Rough. While going through some of his belongings, his sister stumbled upon a business plan that talked in detail about remorse, forgiveness, and second chances. Jay had a dream to help others that no one wanted to give a chance. He believed that people can change and everyone deserves a second chance. She reflected on her brother's infectious laugh, loving heart, and fondness of designer clothes. She also added, he loved to help others, people who were struggling because he knew what it felt like to struggle himself. Jason's death marked the city's 8th homicide of 2015. No one's ever been held responsible for Jason's death, but it's hard not to speculate that it's a possible payback situation or if something from his past contributed to it. Let me know what you think. This is where my story ends. Thank you so much for listening. Talk to you soon. Good night.